Who can take your trash out?
Oh, the garbage man can.
Hey, buddy, watch this.
All right, folks, let's talk about some cards we're not gonna miss when they rotate out of standard format. In other words here, some cards from Year of the Raven that for one reason or another I'm sick of, or just are super forgettable. Maybe they're bad for the game, I think, in one way or another. But cards I'm just happy to see leave so that we can move on to the next era and iteration of Hearthstone, which will hopefully be even more exciting than ever. That said, I'm curious what cards you guys aren't going to miss. What ones are you happy to see leaving standard format? Share that in the comments below. While you're doing that, let's jump into my 10 cards that I'm just not going to miss. Up first here, but in no real particular order, we have our friend Zilly Axe. And I'll be honest, I don't hate Zilly Axe. I think he's a really well-balanced, fairly well-designed card. He never feels like crazy OP outside of couple instances maybe with some like Omega Devastators back in the Dr. Boom Control Warrior era. But beyond that, Zilly Axe has generally been a fine fit for Hearthstone. I think, very popular. He goes in every deck, but he doesn't feel bad. And that's a sign of a great card. But nonetheless, we've seen Zilly Axe everywhere for way too long. So I'm excited to see what Hearthstone looks like when there's not just always that 5 mana heal option that's available. That will not only change how mech decks work, with mechs losing a lot of Boomsday Project power anyway, maybe those kind of go away, but also just any deck that's reliant on that extra little bit of healing to survive. Having Zilly Axe pulled out of the meta can really change what that looks like. So I'm just more than anything excited to see Hearthstone without Zilly Axe more than maybe I hate Zilly Axe or I'm sick of him. I'm just excited to see what the future's like. Next up here, we got Dr. Boom Mad Genius, as I teased there with Zilly Axe. There were a lot of times here with Dr. Boom, pre-nerf in particular, where he was so darn frustrating to play against. That infinite value, the ridiculous removal with all kinds of rush minions. I got sick of that personally, and I'm super relieved to see him nerfed, of course. Now, he's not causing any problems these days. I certainly don't hate Dr. Boom. Galakrond has become the new kind of hero card plague of Hearthstone in a lot of ways. But nonetheless, I'm sort of holding a grudge with Dr. Boom. And I still hated those days so much that I'm kind of relieved he's heading to Wild format exclusively. That said, I hope he does actually get buffed as he moves back into Wild. Because at 9 mana, I don't think he's good enough for Wild format. But in his original 7 mana state, that would be fantastic. So, Dr. Boom, you had your time. You drove us all crazy for a while. Now it's time to go. Next up here, I got a bit of a weird one. It's Dusk Fallen Avianna, which probably surprises you. Why on earth, Regis, do you want to get rid of Dusk Fallen Avianna? Well, basically just because it's a really bad card. And I hate having, in particular, bad legendaries. I think those are really, really frustrating for people. Opening a Duskfallen Avianna in your packs is like, oh my god, what did I do to deserve this? So since Duskfallen Avianna is perhaps the most symbolic of all the bad legendaries from the Year of the Raven sets, as maybe the worst, I think just, it's good to see that disappear. I think the Hearthstone team has done a great job lately of making most legendaries feel competitive, and a lot of them fit into decks. Even if they're not, the star of the deck or meta-defining, they're still kind of playable. And hopefully that's a trend that continues, and maybe Duskfallen Avianna was one of those last bastions of really bad legendaries that we can finally get rid of, and that would be nice to see her go. Next up is Shudder Walk, and he's on this list really just because of those first 2 days of the Witchwood. Yes, that was like 2 years ago at this point, but I'm still having flashbacks of Shudder Walk being played over and over and over again. So for me, this is another one of those grudge cards. I actually really enjoy playing Shudder Walk nowadays, now that he's not a part of a top tier deck or anything. But it's definitely not a card we want ever breaking the meta again, and it can certainly be problematic in all those different ways and can restrict design space in a handful of ways. So Shudder Walk, you had your time. It was disastrous and terrible for a little while. And okay for a while after that, but nonetheless, it's time to go, buddy. Next up here is Christology, another card you're probably not thinking about as like a hate card that you're sick of, But for me, I think Christology has just given Paladin way too much consistency in things like Mech Paladin these days, being able to draw some pretty powerful cards so freaking efficiently. Draw two for 1 mana. Not only that, but it's a tutor, which might seem like a downside. It's like, oh, well, only 1 attack cards, but really that's an upside because often they really want to hit specific sort of magnetic plays, or now Skyclaw being in the pool for Paladin is absolutely ridiculous. And then also just great in things like even Shirvala, Holy Wrath Paladins, just cycling through the deck that quickly can make some moves we've seen in the past as well. So a card that just offered way too much efficiency and power, and I guess kind of helped keep Paladin on the map in a way after it got buffed, and was frankly even good in some decks before it got buffed. But certainly in that post-buff world, Christology, I think, took things just a hair too far, gave them a little bit too much consistency, and it was good to help Paladin get there, but when one card does so freaking much, I think that's a problem. Next up here, I've got Rat Trap, and this is another one of those cards that is just kind of frustrating to play against. I don't think it's imbalanced or it was, OP or anything of the sort, but I hated always having those turns where it's like, oh no, the rat, I can't summon the rat. So that was just, an experiential one for me. I like having options and being able to do everything I want in a given turn, play lots and lots of cards. And because Rat Trap occasionally disrupted that and created all that friction, there are some bad moments that can be associated with that card. And of course, as a streamer, those misplays where it's like, oh no, I summoned the rat and I don't have a way to deal with it. So, for me, Rat Trap is a card that almost more than any other secret could really limit your fun in some ways and caused lots of problems for me throughout the years. So now let's talk about Mira's Unstable Element, a card that I guess I'm happy to see leave for a couple reasons. Number one, it gave some aggressive rogues way too many outs for lethal, where they just hit you in the face really hard and then draw through all their damage and then hit you in the face really, really hard to kill you, and they would just draw so efficiently that there wasn't much you could do about that. But beyond that, and perhaps even more frustrating for me with Mira's Unstable Element, is how it can ruin some random effects like Yog's Puzzle Box, or now the Amazing Reno, where having a card like that in the pool that draws through your entire deck increases the disaster rate more than I'd like as somebody who tends to enjoy more chaotic things for streams and videos. I think it's good to have downsides. Obviously, you need counterbalancing in those random effects, but Mira's perhaps a little bit too negative in the scheme of things. Next up here is Electro, which is a card that I legitimately forgot existed until like a couple weeks ago when we tried to build like a big spell druid deck. I was like, this looks like a custom card. I totally blanked on this card's existence. And any card like that where it's just so freaking forgettable for you, that's a card that it's time for it to go. Who cares? Somebody's going to notice it anyway. So yes, Electro, and any card that's so darn bland and forgettable like this one, I think those are cards that are better suited for Wild. So sure enough, I'm not going to miss you, Electro. Next up is Surrender to Madness. Surrender to Madness was a fun idea. It's like, oh my god, can we ever make this work? But we never did. It was such a frustrating card because it's like impossible to build a legitimately good deck around a Surrender to Madness. So I'm glad that I can finally stop trying, first off. Beyond that, with Embiggen showing up, Surrender to Madness just looks so garbage in comparison. And any card that gets eclipsed so dramatically by a new one, of course I don't want it lingering around. So Surrender to Madness, man, just what a waste of a slot for Priest. Get rid of it. It's time to go. And then finally, one more Priest card here. It's Xeric's Cloning Gallery. This is one that for me is just symbolic of, the latest iteration of Resurrect Priest, which is an archetype I just hate. I loathe playing against Res Priest. It's terrible for streams because games take forever. Your opponents just deny everything you want to do. It's almost like you're not really getting to play Hearthstone at all. You're just kind of hoping for these ridiculously crazy high pressure outs or trying to grind them out long, and there's just like no real chance at all. So Xeric's, just because it is one of the most representative cards for that archetype, like maybe if it leaves, this will finally be the last chance for Res Priest to be a thing, and in the future that's an archetype we just won't have to deal with. One can hope, and believe me, I do. All right, folks, that wraps it up for Year of the Raven cards that we're not going to miss. It was a pretty good year. Rastakhan certainly fell really flat, which was sad. That was one of the first expansions, and Boomsday Project really too, where I got involved in Blizzard stuff. So I have fond memories of this year, even though some of the sets felt a little bit lackluster. I do really wish Rastakhans had gotten like a buff cycle, kind of like Boomsday Project, to bring it up to a more reasonable power level. That said, though, still a really fun year from a flavor standpoint and a lot of good times. So I will miss some cards as well, which we're going to talk about in a future video. So stay tuned for that one. But until then, thanks much for watching. And until next time, game on.